My name's Arcade, and Five Nights at Freddy's 2's earliest theories were pretty bad, but that doesn't mean some of the theories aren't interesting. The first one we're going to cover is about Balloon Boy never being real. This theory comes from the channel Pretty Grumpy Bear, made in 2014. This video was an extension of their earlier theory, discussing why Balloon Boy didn't even have an endoskeleton, and presents a pretty interesting interpretation of why Balloon Boy exists. As the theory points out, Balloon Boy is a pretty weird inclusion of Five Nights at Freddy's, not even being an animal animatronic, and even in the game itself not being able to jump scare you, and instead having voice lines and other effects that don't line up with the other animatronics. In a way, it's similar to Golden Freddy in that they stand out from the main cast, and so this YouTuber wanted to talk about possible reasons why. And I actually like this theory a lot. So what this video claims is that Balloon Boy doesn't actually exist, at least not as an animatronic for the pizzeria. Instead, Balloon Boy is a ghost, or some sort of paranormal spirit. Now there is some pretty interesting evidence for this, not only with Balloon Boy being just a weird design to pair along with the other animatronics, but also that Balloon Boy has very little evidence to even exist in the pizzeria itself. The only evidence of Balloon Boy on any merchandise or any of the such is a children's drawing hanged up on the wall. Other than that, from the pizzeria itself, it doesn't even look like Balloon Boy's included. And there's a pretty interesting way to explain why Balloon Boy is in the children's drawing. If Balloon Boy is indeed a spirit or some kind of ghost, what this theory utilizes is the idea that children are more sensitive to paranormal situations or ghost-like presences. This is sort of like the thing from the It franchise, either the book or the movies, where kids are able to see It, the clown, or whatever monster it presents itself as. And whenever you grow up, you sort of forget or whatever, just because you become more closed-minded as an adult. And I think that as a storytelling mechanic is a really interesting way to set up a horror story. I think stories that utilize that are super fascinating just because I grew up reading It, but also because it's a cool idea to explain away things that would probably get the attention of some adults or any rational human beings. I mean, if you saw the spirit of this Balloon Boy animatronic just like going around and messing with people, and you were aware of that as an adult, you'd probably like do something a little bit more drastic. But if you're a kid, what can you do, you know? While Five Nights at Freddy's is somewhat grounded, at least in the original games, with specific rules and such, they do have an aspect of paranormal or supernatural elements that sometimes get overshadowed by the animatronics themselves. Not only are all of them possessed by children, but it brings into question things like the afterlife or hauntings and makes them real. And I think this is a really cool element of the franchise that sometimes gets overshadowed by complicated AIs or robots that can mimic you or whatever. Before we go to the plot holes or why this theory isn't true and how we can debunk it, I do want to talk about the storytelling of it. At face value, it seems like there's not much here story-wise or to like the timeline overall, but the story it presents is the possibility of Balloon Boy just being some random kid. I think this works better than being a victim of William Afton, although that could also be a possibility as presented by Pretty Grumpy Bear in 2014. The basic premise that they set up is that Balloon Boy was just a kid who was really into the animatronics. A very, very young kid who knows a few words and that's why they can use the voice lines, but was obsessed with the animatronics. And so after an accident, maybe even with the animatronics, at the very least taking place in the pizzeria, they manifested themselves with Balloon Boy's body based off the animatronics that they were surrounded by. This explains why Balloon Boy is the way they are, with not very much following the theme of the other animatronics. This gets explained away later on in the franchise, and it's very interesting to see at the time people theorizing why Balloon Boy's design is the way it is. And I think that was the main fuel that inspired this theory. Why was Balloon Boy so different and seemed to have somewhat of a lackluster presence in the cast? At this point in the theorizing space, Balloon Boy didn't really have that much of an impact to the overall timeline, but what this theory does is include some sort of world building with it. And I think that's really interesting. This fleshes out the pizzeria location, or at least this one, in a more compelling way that has real world impacts. Obviously you can make it so that Balloon Boy was a victim of William Afton, but at that point he would probably just find another animatronic suit to possess. But having there be these sort of unexplainable supernatural events taking place just out of a child's determination to survive Most of the other characters are pretty contained within William Afton's story. So to have other characters, or children in this case, being indirectly affected by Freddy Fazbear's Pizzeria makes the world feel that much more dangerous. I think there's a lot of storytelling potential here for the future if this had ever been used to leap off of in the canon, but due to everything that's out about Five Nights at Freddy's right now, we know a little bit more about Balloon Boy, and it definitely doesn't lead in the direction that this theory was taking it. Because what this theory was essentially saying was that Balloon Boy didn't even have a physical presence. He was just a spirit that presented itself as an animatronic. The only evidence of Balloon Boy ever taking place is children's drawings, because children were more sensitive to the paranormal activity that was going on within this pizzeria. It makes me think of those haunted places around the world that usually have like a main ghost or paranormal presence. Typically this violent or angry ghost or malicious spirit. And then sometimes there's just like another ghost that happens to be there as well that is kind of like relaxed or chilling. I've seen a lot of the videos here on YouTube where people go ghost hunting. It's a pretty common thing for a lot of channels to cover. And this kind of reminds me of those type of places. I think it makes the world feel more fleshed out, that Five Nights at Freddy's is not just this self-contained story within the world, and that these kind of freak occurrences can also happen. And I like in horror, especially when it comes to supernatural situations, whenever they don't explain the rules specifically. I think giving a reason or a rational explanation for everything that happens can sometimes undermine the story's creepy factor, or leaves very little interpretation to audiences. So why did Balloon Boy manifest himself into this spirit, or under what rules? We don't know. But that is where the theory falls apart, because we know more rules about Remnant and such. And this kind of possession, or haunting in this case, can't take place. So Balloon Boy is an actual animatronic, because Remnant just doesn't work the way this theory presents itself as. It is easy to criticize these older theories for not knowing enough, because hindsight will always be 2020. But I love exploring these older theories for these creative storytelling elements. But as we're gonna get on later in the video, just because a theory is creative doesn't mean it's good. Though for this one, I do like it a lot. I'm gonna give it a 7 out of 10 Freddy Fazbears. Before we start going on to the really bad theories though, I do want to cover one that I like even more than the Balloon Boy theory. This theory was posted on Reddit by the Ghost of Ember, made 11 years ago, and talks about how Five Nights at Freddy's 2 is a flashback. But the main thing that I like about this theory is that it says the phone guy is Freddy Fazbear. As always, all these posts will be linked in the description below so that you can go check them out, and I highly recommend that you do. It is super fun revisiting these older theories, and I did have to dig through a lot of theories to do research for this video. And this is probably one of my favorite earlier theories. I'm just going to read out the post and then I'll cut in to give my thoughts. Before you even enter the menu of Five Nights at Freddy's, you are forced into a cutscene where you look through the eyes of Freddy in the location of the FNAF 1 diner. These cutscenes precede the later nights as well, even though they seem to serve no narrative purpose. Once the full game is completed, we learn a few things that recontextualize these scenes. The primary events of FNAF 2 occur prior to FNAF 1. The puppet is a supernatural entity with undetermined motivation. It has the ability to play spirits in the animatronics. Jeremy Fitzgerald is likely the victim in the bite of 87 and is brain dead, and by the time the FNAF 1, most likely regular dead, because I doubt someone who works a minimum wage job is going to be able to afford life support all that long. The person looking through the eyes of Freddy in the cutscenes is being haunted by the puppet, even though there is no physical puppet present in FNAF 1. From this and a few other things I'll go to in a moment, I believe that Jeremy Fitzgerald is the spirit within Freddy in FNAF 1, and the events of FNAF 2 are him remembering and trying to piece together what happened to him. I love this idea for a few reasons, and one is what the post says later on, in that this is kind of foreshadowed if this were to happen. The theory does get a few things right, the main ones being that FNAF 2 happens before FNAF 1, and that Jeremy Fitzgerald is the bite of 87. Not only that, but also that we play as him in FNAF 2. Jeremy Fitzgerald is a really cool character. I personally like him a lot. Well, his phone calls are annoying. He's easily one of the standout characters within the first 2 games. And while there's a pretty obvious plot hole within this theory, I want to cover that last just so that I could talk about the story of this real quick. As always with these series, I like covering the storytelling potential of it. That's why I like these series. FNAF is at its best whenever it's telling a cohesive narrative. And that's kind of why I don't like as many theories nowadays, because, well, FNAF's lore is very much all over the place, so is it even really a good story if you can't tell it? But that's probably a topic for another video. But let me know what you guys think about that in the comments. The thing with this is, as the post points out, is that this event is foreshadowed. Jeremy uses Freddy's mask in the course of the game to avoid the animatronics hurting him as he tries to blend in. And I think that foreshadowing could have been so cool. Just the idea of like eventually becoming the mask is super sick, and I like that a lot. I like when foreshadowing is done right in stories, and that could have been a really cool alternate universe. And as it also points out, the theory does mention that Freddy in the first game is not terribly aggressive towards you. Not only is he the last one to go after you in the first few nights, but has a few different quirks that the post draws parallels to Jeremy Fitzgerald, saying that when the power runs out, Freddy waits until after a music box finishes playing to attack, mirroring kind of how Puppet works in FNAF 2, which Jeremy Fitzgerald had to experience. There's a second half of this theory that FNAF 2 is just Jeremy Fitzgerald's perspective of piecing all this lore together. And the reason, this is actually really cool, and the reason that we can see the minigames canonically is because this is from Jeremy Fitzgerald's perspective, through the eyes of Freddy Fazbear trapped within a decaying animatronic, saying that the animatronic itself also has memories, which there is kind of a basis for in the later games, and potentially even this one, depending what theory you follow. The animatronics do have their own AI, so it makes sense that Jeremy Fitzgerald would also see these memories, and I think that is really cool. But the biggest thing is that this is definitely debunked. This theory does not work in today's standards, and even at the time too. Not only is it shown in the Give Life minigame that the spirits are already assigned to the original animatronics, but it makes sense for Freddy Fazbear to be possessed by one of the missing kids. So this theory objectively doesn't pan out. But even for the time, story-wise, this is super cool. This might be a hot take, but I feel like Freddy Fazbear is sometimes sidelined his own franchise. Not only is he possessed by one of the missing children that has very little personality other than a few headcanons that people have, but it very much blends in with the other main cast of Chica, Bonnie, and Foxy, which there's nothing wrong with. But Freddy doesn't do anything to stand himself apart story-wise. He's just a victim like the other animatronics. And while there's nothing wrong with that, that means that it gives more spotlight to other figures that are just inherently more interesting, such as Springtrap, the Puppet, or even Golden Freddy, who is probably the most interesting character in the franchise, or at least the subject of so many theories. With Freddy, sometimes story-wise, there just isn't much to talk about just because he's just like Chica, Bonnie, and Foxy. And what this does is give more of a presence to Freddy Fazbear, as if the phone guy really was the spirit within Freddy Fazbear, it'd make it a lot more interesting. Not only would it make the first game that much more interesting because one of the animatronics is literally just an old night guard, and it's kind of this continuous cycle that's tragic, but it also just presents this interesting story about a night guard working on Fazbear's Pizza somehow possessing one of the animatronics. And so whenever they do get released, it's that much more of a compelling ending for Jeremy Fitzgerald as opposed to just being murked by the animatronic at the bite of 87. I think I mostly just like this because it's cool that Jeremy uses the mask and then becomes a mask later on. And while the theory is really cool and I do like the story, it really doesn't line up with what we know now. And what's interesting about the lore in FNAF 2 is it's a lot more intentional than in FNAF 1. And that's one of the reasons I wanted to make this video, to see how the theories differ. In the last video, when we talked about FNAF 1's theories, they were a lot more creative when it came to the overall narrative, with some of them even being very out there with that one theory that I'm sure you know what I'm talking about. And it's mostly because in the first game, all the story was really there, at least not how it is now. In FNAF 2, Scott put a lot more intentional Easter eggs that were like puzzle pieces for the story, where in FNAF 1, they were just kind of forced together into this very awkward finished product. As a lot of the comments pointed out in the last video, there wasn't even much of a story there until people made it happen. But in FNAF 2, that isn't the case. In FNAF 2, there clearly is a narrative behind the game. And so what that leads to is a lot of theories that are kind of useless, unlike this one. I like this one a lot. But as you'll see later on in the video, a lot of the theorizing community tried to pick apart different Easter eggs that didn't really contribute to a narrative perspective. It was just like talking about possibilities of why things happen. Like, for example, in FNAF 1, there was that Foxy is a good guy theory. And I feel like there's a lot more of those in FNAF 2, where people make theories out of stuff that really isn't there. I do definitely feel like FNAF 1 had a lot of more creative theories because people were designing the narrative. After the second game released, a lot of people's theories started becoming a lot more narrowed into the actual lore within the game, so a lot of the creativity was lost, but while that happened, I think theories like this still prevail. It was kind of that sweet spot where just enough speculation was required to make a fully fleshed story, but not so much that you could just run with it. Regardless, I really like this theory. It presents a really cool narrative. I'm eager to see what you guys think, so leave a comment about what you think about this theory. Phone Guy being Freddy Fazbear might sound pretty outlandish, but I do like the theory, even though it's definitely not true. I'm gonna give it a solid 8 out of 10 Freddy Fazbears, but I'm not gonna say the same praises about this next theory. I do not like this next theory. Just gonna point that out right now, which is that Phone Guy faked his death. I am going to read out the post. This was made by a deleted user 10 years ago, and starts by saying, first in call 4, we hear him saying that he might not be around and talk to you tomorrow. We hear Foxy banging on the door, but Foxy never does this in this manner, not even on 20 mode. He doesn't just run every 2 seconds and start banging on the door. And then Freddy's anthem starts playing. This could be just a recording of some sort because if the power ran out, the phone guy's call would be stopped short, never to go again much sooner. If Freddy were in the kitchen, it'd be much quieter considering it's hallway across the building from the office. Also, notice the lack of fear in his voice. There's no screaming, no crying, just, oh no, oh no. And the stuttering could be his actual nervousness for trying to get through the night. Fake a phone call, which ultimately leads to faking his death, and talking all at the same time while also thinking about what he'll have to do after he fakes his death. So the stuttering is because of that. But it seems so unnatural that you're almost about to die, you just say, oh no, emotionlessly. The Golden Freddy cry, that could have just been Mike's imagination, considering that Golden Freddy is a strange apparition who doesn't necessarily possess physicality. He can enter your office with both doors closed. Maybe Mike, most likely crazy by night 4, expected to hear something happen, but since he's never heard of the animatronic scream before, he wouldn't know. The night 5 call, maybe he wanted to create the illusion that he can still see Mike from beyond, and possess the phone to call Mike or something, and distorted the audio. Honestly, that last bit was probably the most interesting thing about this, the phone guy actually being the phone. And while that's kind of cool, I don't think this theory is good. While all these theories don't hold up anymore and are objectively bad, they are still endearing, for the most part. But not this. This is kind of what I'm talking about when a lot of theories in FNAF 2's release don't affect the plot at all or in a meaningful way. Because what this theory is saying is that Phone Guy faked his death. And then what? What happened? Obviously, it's easy to say, oh, there's no payout for it because it didn't happen, because we know now after all the games are out. But even for the time, what this sets up something that is never paid off or isn't very interesting at all. Also, it does diminish Phone Guy's own character, because why would he fake his own death? If he really thought he was gonna die and was preparing for that or whatever, just don't go to work. Like, you don't need to work at this place with these quirky animatronics to try to stuff you into a suit. Dude, I don't get paid enough. As a minimum wage job employee, I would not get paid enough to do that. I would quit the first week. It is worth pointing out the inconsistencies of Foxy banging on the door, which she never does in the game, and then Freddy showing up with the music box playing, which is an indication that the power ran out, meaning Phone Guy's call wouldn't be recording. But those could be boiled down to just quirks or whatever of the animatronics in that specific scene. There's just no real point to this. There's not much story to tackle here. If anything, it raises more questions that don't exactly lead anywhere, like what does Phone Guy get out of faking his death? Faking your death is kind of a bigger thing than just like, oh, I'm gone now, no one knows about me. It seems like there would have to be some motivation for him to do that, or to want to convince the people around him that he's dead. Even to Mike, why would you want to do that? Also, as one of the comments under this thread points out, him saying oh no could just be like an acceptance as opposed to him being nervous or whatever. By this point in the night, being trapped or whatever, surrounded by the animatronics, at that point, you probably know you're cooked. You're just accepting it and waiting for it to happen. So oh no is probably just this sort of realization that this is it, it's over, which is sad. But just because it's emotionless doesn't mean it's not a reasonable reaction to have. Well, it would be cool to Phone Guy to have survived it wouldn't make sense for the rest of the story either, because he is the victim of the bite of 87. And I'm sure there's more plot holes than this thing points out, but that's a pretty big one that Phone Guy did get, chomped. The real question is who did it. So yeah, while a lot of people can say this theory is bad because of the evidence or whatever, I say it's bad because of the story that it presents. I can excuse the different rationalities or plot holes if the story and narrative behind it was actually good. And the story behind this, not very good. I don't think it's very compelling at all. Unlike a few other theories we've covered in the past, it's not really insulting though. So I'm just going to give it a 4 out of 10 Freddy Fazbear's. This next theory might be a bit more controversial though, and it's about Mike Killall, which is the theory that Michael Afton was the one responsible for the children's deaths and how they possess the animatronics. I'm eventually going to make a video about this theory in general, but what this is specific to FNAF 2 is in the trailer for the game. The trailer for the game used the song London Bridge is Falling Down, and there's a specific part where if you reverse it, you can hear Mike Killall, and I'll just play that for you right now. While that is cool, I don't like it for several reasons. You have to go with that phrase in mind to hear it. All it is some audio trick, and I'm sure you've seen this before on TikToks or Instagram Reels or whatever, God forbid YouTube Shorts. You can hear different phrases in very popular songs if you just think about it really hard. It's just our brain piecing together the audio information in just a different way. I do like the concept of using these kind of audio tricks or whatever in promotional material and hiding secret messages. I think there's a level of creepiness to it, especially whenever you reverse audios or whatever. But this one, it doesn't work, not only because it supports a pretty bad theory, as we could cover later on, but also because it's barely even there. You have to really make it work. The song itself is interesting though. A lot of people have talked about how the lyrics in the song tie in pretty closely to the FNAF franchise, and it might be intentional on that part, with one of the lines being a night guard standing on watch, with one of the lyrics being a man standing on watch, which would be a night guard. And I think that's pretty cool, but I think using this is stretching it. Mike Killall as a theory too is pretty bad. But this was extremely common in a lot of YouTube videos back in the day, and with a lot of people saying, oh, I can hear it. And while it is creepy, just because of the reversed audio, I really don't think there's a hidden message in there, and that was by no means intentional. So yeah, I'm gonna give it a 3 out of 10 Freddy Fazbear's. This one was made by Taco Outbreak 10 years ago, saying how Springtrap is Golden Freddy. This might not be FNAF 2 specific, but I just wanted to talk about it right now, and I'll read it out for you. I think Springtrap is Golden Freddy. Why? Well, he is yellow-green, so he could be mossy yellow. Another reason is the troll games got posted in the menu. It looked like Springtrap took his head off, so I think he will use heads of old characters, because in the I Am Still Here image, it looks like he has Golden Foxy head. So I think in the end he will Golden Freddy head, because he is him. I mean, he is Freddy's body, so that's why I think he is Golden Freddy. So please tell me what you think. Note, if you say but his name is Springtrap, well, that's the name they gave Golden Freddy. I think we did it. We solved Golden Freddy's identity. Anyways, 10 out of 10 Freddy Fazbear's. The first one on this channel to get 10 out of 10. And the last theory I want to cover is just the idea that Five Nights at Freddy's 2 is not a prequel. While Five Nights at Freddy's 2 is a sequel, the events of the game take place before FNAF 1. A lot of the evidence points to dates used on checks and the such. Over the course of the years, people have nailed down every detail in these games, and it's pretty apparent that the game is taking place before. But especially at the time, the events of the timeline were still pretty debated. This was made 11 years ago on Reddit by the user MuffinCheese47. And I'm just going to read out a few details here specifically, as a lot of the evidence is just kind of wonky or falls flat. I highly recommend that you check this post out. It's definitely interesting to revisit these old theorizing spaces. For one, it uses the evidence that Scott said it was a sequel when he was talking about it, and he said that it's a sequel to Five Nights at Freddy's, which could just mean the game itself, FNAF 2, as in it's a game that comes after FNAF 1, but takes place before. But also, this is just pretty interesting because I don't know where Scott has said this. Whenever it comes to the theorizing space, Scott is usually pretty hands-off for the most part, so I'd be curious to see what this post is referencing. Also, I'm just going to read a few more of these. Balloon Boy was not in Five Nights at Freddy's 1. Okay, yeah, I don't know how that's evidence to support this theory. There are more animatronics, not less. I think what this post kind of doesn't realize is that these are two separate locations, but I'm not going to criticize it too much. It is an older post. I'm going to read one more though, that says the new ones look different, which, you know, it's because they're different animatronics. Regardless though, if you guys have any more early theories that you want me to talk about, or if you guys want me to talk about FNAF 3 early theories, then let me know in the comments. Your guys' support for the last video of FNAF 1's earlier theories was crazy. That video is blowing up, and I'm very grateful for your guys' support. Your comments have been amazing. It feels like I have the best community here. We just hit 4,000 subscribers, which is insane. I think this time last year I had maybe 300, maybe 400. And well, I've always been happy just making videos and whatever. The fact that it's getting this much attention and positive feedback is insane. I'm so grateful for your guys' support. It really means the world to me. And if you want me to cover any other interesting videos or topics, let me know in the comments. I'm eager to see what you guys want me to cover next. I make these videos for fun, so to see this, I don't know, happen is really, I don't know, I'm speechless. I'm literally speechless. Thank you guys so much. It means the world to me. I hope you guys have a great rest of your day. And as always, I hope you're a bit less bored.